Will you stay if we undress? Japanese prison of war. Sister asked after Black American soldier saved them in the river. August 23, 1945, 5:15 in the afternoon. Mindanao River, Philippine Islands. The muddy water churned with deadly force as 3 Japanese women clung to an overturned supply crate, their screams lost in the roar of the monsoon-swollen current. They had survived the fall of their garrison, survived the brutal jungle trek, survived capture by American forces. Now they would drown in a river less than 40 yards from shore. Sergeant Elias Hawkins, 30 years old and 6,000 miles from his Alabama home, didn't hesitate. He dropped his rifle and dove from the riverbank, his powerful strokes cutting through water the color of coffee. Behind him, his commanding officer shouted something about regulations and letting them go. Elias didn't hear. He saw 3 human beings drowning, and that was all that mattered. The women had been told Americans were demons. Japanese propaganda had filled their minds with horror stories since childhood. American soldiers tortured prisoners, the broadcasts said. They murdered women without mercy. They were barbarians who knew nothing of honor or humanity. When the transport truck carrying them to the prisoner of war camp had skidded off the muddy road and plunged into the swollen river, the women had expected their captors to laugh and watch them drown. Instead, a Black American soldier was swimming toward them through the violent current. Yuki Takahashi, 25 years old and the daughter of a decorated Imperial Army officer, grabbed the crate tighter as the soldier approached. Her mind screamed contradictions. He's going to kill us. He's going to save us. Americans don't save Japanese. But he's swimming toward us. Nothing made sense. Elias reached them as the crate began to break apart. He grabbed Yuki first, pulling her onto his back despite her resistance. She fought him instinctively, her fists striking his shoulders. He absorbed the blows without reaction, swimming steadily toward shore with a strength that defied the current's pull. On the bank, other American soldiers had thrown ropes. Elias caught one and secured it around Yuki's waist before diving back for the others. 22-year-old Emiko Sato, former nurse in the Imperial Japanese Army, went limp when Elias reached her. She had accepted death. The propaganda had been clear. Capture meant torture and shame. Drowning was preferable. But the American soldier wrapped his arm around her chest and pulled her toward safety, speaking words she couldn't understand in a voice that held no anger, no hatred, only focused determination. 19-year-old Hana Mori watched her companions reach shore, then felt the crate disintegrate beneath her hands. The current pulled her under. Water filled her mouth and nose. In that moment of drowning, she thought of her mother's final words before she left for military service. Americans are animals without souls. Die before you let them touch you. Then strong hands grabbed her arm and pulled her upward. Air rushed into her lungs. Elias Hawkins had come back a 3rd time. On the muddy riverbank, the 3 women lay coughing and shivering while American soldiers wrapped them in blankets and checked for injuries. Elias knelt beside them, water streaming from his uniform, his dark face creased with concern. He spoke slowly, gesturing to show he meant no harm. A medic arrived with a canteen of fresh water. Another soldier built a small fire to warm them. Yuki's mind couldn't process what was happening. The demons from the propaganda broadcasts were offering her water and warmth. The monsters were saving their lives. As Elias met her eyes, his expression holding only compassion and relief, a single question formed in her confused mind. If everything we were told about Americans was a lie, what else isn't true? Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world you are watching from today. Now back to the story. August 24th, 1945, 7 o'clock in the morning. Highway 7, 30 miles from Camp Dalton Prisoner of War facility. The transport truck carrying the 3 Japanese women rumbled along the rutted road. But this time they rode inside, not in chains in the back. They sat on bench seats with blankets still wrapped around their shoulders from the night before. Across from them, Sergeant Elias Hawkins dozed with his rifle propped beside him, his head nodding with the truck's motion. Yuki studied him in the morning light filtering through the canvas cover. His uniform was still damp from yesterday's rescue. Mud stained his boots and trousers. He had given up his dry jacket to Emiko, who wore it now despite its being 3 sizes too large. Nothing about this matched what Yuki had been taught. Japanese propaganda had shown American soldiers as crude, violent men who took pleasure in cruelty. This man had risked his life 3 times in a raging river to save enemy prisoners. The truck stopped at a checkpoint. Voices called out in English. The truck lurched forward again, then pulled off the road. Someone opened the rear canvas flap. Bright sunlight flooded in. An American officer appeared, older than Elias, with captain's bars on his collar. He spoke to Elias, who nodded and gestured to the women. The captain studied them for a moment, then said something that made Elias smile. What happened next shattered another piece of Yuki's worldview. The captain produced 3 wrapped packages from a canvas bag. He handed them to the women, miming the motion of eating. Yuki unwrapped hers with trembling fingers. Inside was a thick sandwich made with white bread, sliced meat, cheese, and lettuce. A small red apple sat beside it, a bar of chocolate, a canteen of clean water. In Japan, civilians were starving. Rations had been cut month after month as American submarines strangled the supply lines. Yuki's own family had been surviving on rice porridge and pickled vegetables. Her younger brother had written about eating grass to fill his empty stomach. Yet here, enemy prisoners were being given sandwiches made with real meat and fresh bread. Emiko bit into her sandwich, and tears immediately filled her eyes. Hana stared at hers as if it might disappear. Neither woman could reconcile the abundance in their hands with the deprivation they knew existed back home. Elias noticed their hesitation. He pulled out his own ration, an identical sandwich, and took a large bite. He gestured for them to eat, his expression encouraging. The message was clear. This food is safe. This food is real. Eat. Yuki ate slowly, every bite confirming an impossible truth. The bread was soft and fresh. The meat was real, not the processed paste Japanese soldiers received. The cheese was creamy and rich. This wasn't special treatment designed to manipulate them. This was standard American military rations. When they finished eating, Elias produced the chocolate bar he'd been saving from his own rations. He broke it into 3 pieces and offered them to the women. Chocolate had vanished from Japan years ago. Yuki had last tasted it as a teenager before the war. Now an American soldier was sharing his chocolate with Japanese prisoners. Hana accepted her piece and spoke for the first time since the river rescue. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the words came out in careful English she'd learned in school years ago. Why you save us? Elias looked at her for a long moment. He seemed to consider his words carefully, knowing the weight they carried. When he finally spoke, he used simple English words, speaking slowly so they might understand. Because you're human beings, same as me. The truck started moving again, carrying them toward the prisoner of war camp. But something had shifted in that brief stop. The propaganda had taught them that Americans viewed Japanese as subhuman, as vermin to be exterminated. Yet this American soldier had just stated the opposite with such simple clarity that no amount of training could dismiss it. Yuki looked down at the chocolate melting in her palm. Such a small thing, such an enormous gesture. August 25th, 1945. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Camp Dalton Prisoner of War Facility, Leyte Island. The 3 Japanese women stood at the camp entrance, expecting hell. Behind barbed wire fences, they could see dozens of other Japanese prisoners moving about. Some worked in garden plots. Others sat in the shade of barrack buildings. None appeared to be starving. None bore visible signs of torture. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Captain James Hayes met them at the gate. He was 42 years old, a schoolteacher from Oregon before the war. He carried a clipboard and wore glasses that made him look more like a clerk than a soldier. Through a Japanese-American translator, he explained, "The camp rules. The women would receive 3 meals daily. They would have access to medical care. They would work but not be forced into dangerous labor. They had rights under the Geneva Conventions. Any abuse would be reported and punished." Yuki waited for the catch. There had to be a catch. In Japan, she had been taught that international law was a Western fiction, that Americans ignored treaties whenever convenient. Yet Captain Hayes recited regulations as if they mattered, as if the lives of enemy prisoners held value. The women's barracks shocked them further. Wooden buildings with raised floors to prevent flooding. Cots with thin mattresses and blankets. A shared washing area with running water and soap. Electric lights overhead. Screens on the windows to keep out mosquitoes. The conditions were basic but clean, better than many Japanese soldiers had experienced in the field. Emiko examined the medical supplies in the camp infirmary with professional interest. She had worked in field hospitals where doctors operated without anesthesia, where bandages were washed and reused until they fell apart, where infection killed more men than combat. The American medical station had glass bottles of penicillin, cases of sterile bandages, proper surgical tools, and abundant supplies of medicine. A Japanese prisoner named Kenji Yamamoto, captured 6 months earlier on Okinawa, showed them around. He had been a sergeant in the Imperial Army. Now he worked in the camp kitchen and had gained 20 pounds since capture. His transformation was visible and troubling. "I know what you're thinking," Kenji said quietly as they walked. "You think this is a trick? You think they're fattening us for some terrible purpose? I thought the same thing. But it's been 6 months. The food keeps coming. The medicine keeps coming. They treat us like the human beings." That evening, dinner proved Kenji's point. Rice, beans, bread, canned vegetables, and small portions of meat. Coffee with real sugar. Fresh fruit for dessert. The quantity exceeded what Japanese soldiers received at the front. It exceeded what Japanese civilians received at home. The abundance was casual, routine, unremarkable to the American guards who oversaw the meal. Yuki ate mechanically, her mind struggling with implications. If America could feed enemy prisoners this well while fighting a global war, what did that say about Japanese propaganda claims of American weakness? What did it say about the inevitable victory Tokyo promised? After dinner, Elias appeared at their barrack. He had brought a Japanese-English dictionary and a pad of paper. Through gestures and broken communication, he asked about their lives before the war. Yuki found herself describing her family's farm in Hiroshima Prefecture. Emiko talked about nursing school in Osaka. Hana mentioned her love of reading and her dreams of becoming a teacher. Elias listened to everything, his attention genuine and focused. He asked questions that showed real interest, not the cold interrogation they expected. He shared his own story of growing up in Alabama, working his father's cotton farm, facing prejudice for the color of his skin. The parallel wasn't lost on the women. He understood what it meant to be judged for factors beyond your control. Before leaving, Elias pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet. It showed a young black woman holding a baby. His wife and daughter, he explained through gestures and the few Japanese words he'd learned. Sarah and Grace, back in Montgomery, waiting for him. The photograph changed everything Propaganda had portrayed American soldiers as rootless mercenaries fighting for money and conquest. But here was a man with a family, with people he loved, with a home he wanted to return to. He wasn't fighting because he enjoyed violence. He was fighting because his country called him. That night, Yuki lay on her cot, unable to sleep. Every assumption she'd built her identity around was crumbling. The Americans weren't demons. The camps weren't death factories. The abundance was real. And somewhere in her mind, a terrifying question began to form. If we were wrong about this, what else were we wrong about? September 2nd, 1945. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Camp Dalton Recreational Area. News of Japan's surrender had reached the camp 3 days earlier. Most Japanese prisoners had received it in stunned silence, unable to process that the divine empire had fallen. Some wept, others refused to believe. A few had attempted suicide before being stopped by guards and fellow prisoners. The psychological impact was devastating. Everything they had fought for was gone. Hana found Elias sitting alone under a mango tree, writing a letter home. She approached hesitantly, still uncertain about initiating contact despite a week of small kindnesses. He looked up and smiled, gesturing for her to sit. She settled onto the grass several feet away, maintaining the distance her culture demanded. But distance couldn't contain the questions burning inside her. Why? The English word came out sharper than she intended. Why you kind to us? Elias set down his letter and considered the question. His answer would matter more than he knew. You want the truth? He asked. She nodded. He took a breath and began to speak slowly, carefully choosing words she might understand. Back home in Alabama, I grew up knowing what hate feels like. I couldn't eat at certain restaurants, couldn't drink from certain water fountains, couldn't go to certain schools, all because of my skin color. White folks looked at me and saw something less than human. They didn't see Elias Hawkins. They saw a black man, and that was all that mattered to them. Hana listened intently, understanding perhaps half the words but grasping the emotion behind them. When I joined the army, I thought maybe things would be different. But they put us in segregated units, black soldiers serving a country that didn't fully accept them, fighting for freedom overseas while our families couldn't vote back home. The irony wasn't lost on us. He paused, watching a group of prisoners playing cards in the distance. So when I see you and your friends, I see what I've always seen. Human beings caught in circumstances beyond their control. You didn't start this war. Neither did I. But here we are, on opposite sides of something neither of us fully understands. I can choose to see you as the enemy, or I can choose to see you as someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone who probably just wanted to live a normal life before all this happened. Hana felt tears forming. The words were cutting through defenses she didn't know she had. Japanese propaganda, she said haltingly in English. Say American soldiers are monsters. Say you kill prisoners. Say you have no honor. But you save us from river. You give us food. You show us photographs of your family. This is not monster behavior. No, Elias agreed. It's human behavior. And that's what propaganda tries to destroy. It tries to make us forget that our enemies are human too. Because if we remember that, it becomes much harder to kill each other. Yuki and Emiko had been listening from nearby. They approached now, drawn by the conversation. Through a mixture of English, Japanese, and universal human expression, the four of them talked for over an hour. Elias shared stories of racism in America, of laws that treated black citizens as second class, of violence and discrimination that his people faced daily. The women shared their own experiences of rigid Japanese society, of expectations that crushed individuality, of propaganda that had shaped their entire worldview. The parallel was striking. Both had grown up in societies that judged people by categories rather than character. Both had been taught that certain groups were inherently inferior. Both had seen how easily hate could be manufactured and spread. "My mother," Yuki said slowly in her limited English, "she tell me Americans are demons. She truly believed this. Now I know she wrong. But how many other things she tell me are wrong? How do I know what is truth?" Elias met her eyes with understanding. "You start by questioning everything, by judging people by their actions, not their labels, by choosing to see humanity even when it's difficult." As the sun set over Camp Dalton, 4 people from completely different worlds sat together in a moment of profound connection. The war had ended. The killing had stopped. But the real work of healing was just beginning. And it would start with conversations exactly like this one, where former enemies chose to see each other as human beings first. September 10th, 1945. 9 o'clock in the morning. Camp Dalton Education Area. 2 weeks after Japan's surrender, the camp had transformed. The tension that came with active warfare had given way to a strange limbo. Thousands of Japanese prisoners waited to learn their fate. Would they be sent home? Would they face war crimes trials? Would they be allowed to rebuild their lives? Nobody knew. In this uncertainty, something unexpected emerged: cultural exchange. Captain Hayes had established an informal education program. Japanese prisoners taught origami and calligraphy. American soldiers taught English and basic mathematics. Former enemies sat side by side, learning from each other. The program was voluntary, but participation grew daily. People on both sides were discovering that understanding reduced fear. Hana attended every English lesson. She had always loved language, and now that same love gave her a bridge across an impossible divide. Private First Class Marcus Johnson, a 23-year-old soldier from Detroit, became her informal tutor. He was patient with her mistakes and celebrated her progress. Within a week, she could hold basic conversations. Within 2 weeks, she was helping translate for other prisoners. The transformation was visible. The frightened young woman who had emerged from the river 3 weeks earlier now walked with confidence. She smiled readily. She initiated conversations with American soldiers who weeks ago she would have viewed as monsters. She had even started a journal, writing in both Japanese and English about her experiences and revelations. Emiko found her own bridge through medicine. The camp doctor, Major Robert Chen, was a Chinese-American physician from San Francisco. He recognized Emiko's nursing background and invited her to assist in the infirmary. Initially, she was hesitant. Working alongside Americans felt like betrayal of everything she'd been taught. But the needs of sick and injured prisoners overcame her resistance. Major Chen treated her as a colleague, not a prisoner. He asked her opinions on patient care. He taught her about penicillin and other modern medicines unavailable in Japan. He showed her surgical techniques that would save lives. Most importantly, he treated Japanese and American patients with equal care and attention. No favoritism, no discrimination, just medicine practiced with skill and compassion. One afternoon, an American soldier came in with a severe infection from a jungle cut. Emiko assisted with the surgery, her hands steady and competent. Afterward, Major Chen thanked her profusely. The soldier, groggy from anesthesia, grasped her hand and said, "Thank you." 2 words in English, but they carried the weight of reconciliation. Yuki's bridge took longer to build. Her resistance ran deeper, rooted in family pride and nationalist conviction. She still struggled with the fundamental question: how could she accept kindness from the people who had bombed her homeland, who might have killed her family in the firebombing of Japanese cities? Elias understood her struggle. He didn't push. Instead, he simply continued to be present, to show up, to demonstrate through consistent action that his kindness wasn't a trick or manipulation. It was simply who he chose to be. One evening, He invited Yuki to walk the camp perimeter with him during his guard duty. She agreed reluctantly. They walked in silence for several minutes before Elias spoke. "You know what I've learned in this war?" he said. "That hate is easy. It's the default setting for humans when we're scared or threatened. Love is harder. Kindness is harder. Seeing the humanity in our enemies is the hardest thing of all, but it's also the only thing that can break the cycle." Yuki listened, her defenses finally crumbling. "My father," she said quietly, "died at Okinawa. Maybe American bombs killed him. Maybe American bullets. I should hate you for that. Propaganda tell me to hate you. But you saved my life. You treated me with dignity when you could have left me to drown. How do I reconcile these things?" "You don't have to reconcile them all at once," Elias replied gently. "Grief and gratitude can exist side by side. You can mourn your father and still acknowledge that individual Americans showed you kindness. Those aren't contradictions. They're just the messy reality of being human." Tears flowed down Yuki's face. For the first time since her capture, she let herself cry. Not tears of shame or defeat, but tears of release. Release from the rigid expectations that had bound her. Release from the propaganda that had shaped her worldview. Release from the belief that showing vulnerability was weakness. Elias stood respectfully silent, giving her space to grieve. When she finally composed herself, she looked at him with new eyes. "Thank you," she said in English, "for seeing me, not Japanese prisoner. Me." "Always," Elias replied. And in that moment, the bridge was complete. September 18th, 1945, 6 o'clock in the morning, Camp Dalton Agricultural Section. The morning sun broke through clouds as 70 Japanese prisoners assembled for work assignments. Among them stood Yuki, Emiko, and Hana, now 3 weeks into captivity, and still adjusting to a reality that contradicted everything they'd been taught. Captain Hayes divided them into groups. Some would tend vegetable gardens. Others would help maintain camp buildings. A few would work in the kitchen preparing meals. Yuki was assigned to the garden detail alongside a dozen other prisoners and 3 American guards. The work was simple. Pull weeds, water plants, harvest ripe vegetables. Nothing demanding, nothing punishing. Just ordinary labor that would help feed the camp population. She knelt in the dirt beside an older Japanese prisoner named Takeshi Suzuki, a former schoolteacher from Kyoto who had been captured on Luzon 4 months earlier. Takeshi worked efficiently, his hands moving with practiced ease through the tomato plants. He seemed almost content, an attitude that disturbed Yuki deeply. How could anyone find peace in captivity? How could anyone accept their situation so completely? "You're new," Takeshi said quietly in Japanese, not looking up from his work. "I can tell by the way you keep watching the guards, waiting for them to become the monsters from the propaganda broadcasts." Yuki said nothing, but Takeshi continued. "I waited too. For 4 months I waited. The beatings never came. The starvation never came. The torture never came. Eventually, I had to accept that perhaps everything we were told was a lie." An American guard approached, a young corporal named Daniel Wright from Iowa. He was 21 years old and had volunteered for the Pacific Theater after his brother was killed at Pearl Harbor. He carried a basket of harvested cucumbers and spoke to Takeshi in broken Japanese he'd been learning from the prisoners. "Good work today. Very good." He gestured to the neat rows of weeded plants. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out several pieces of hard candy, offering them to the prisoners. Not as payment, not as manipulation, just as a small kindness between human beings working side by side in the morning heat. Yuki accepted the candy with trembling hands. 3 weeks ago, she would have refused it as an insult. Now she recognized it for what it was. A gesture of basic human decency from someone who could have chosen cruelty instead. Across the garden, Emiko worked in the medicinal herb section under the supervision of Major Chen. He was teaching her to identify plants used in traditional medicine, plants that could supplement the camp's pharmaceutical supplies. Her nursing training made her a natural student, and Chen treated her as a colleague rather than a prisoner. They discussed proper harvesting techniques, optimal growing conditions, and potential applications for various plants. When an American soldier working nearby cut his hand on a garden tool, Emiko responded without thinking. She cleaned the wound, applied pressure to stop the bleeding, and bandaged it properly using supplies from Chen's medical kit. The soldier thanked her profusely. Chen praised her quick response. For a moment, nationality didn't matter. There was only a nurse helping an injured person, fulfilling the oath she'd taken years ago. Hana's assignment took her to the camp kitchen, where she worked alongside Private Marcus Johnson and several other American soldiers preparing lunch for 300 people. The scale of the operation amazed her. Industrial-sized pots, massive ovens, walk-in refrigerators stocked with food. Back in Japan, military kitchens struggled to feed soldiers with limited rations. Here, prisoners of war ate better than Japanese civilians. Marcus showed her how to use the American cooking equipment, patiently explaining each device. The electric mixer fascinated her. The gas ranges with their instant heat. The seemingly endless supply of ingredients: rice, flour, canned vegetables, dried beans, cooking oil, spices. Abundance that defied comprehension. As she worked, Hana listened to the American soldiers joking and talking. Their conversation was ordinary, mundane. They discussed baseball games, letters from home, plans for after the war. They weren't monsters. They weren't demons. They were young men who wanted to go home, who missed their families, who dreamed of normal lives, just like Japanese soldiers, just like everyone caught in this terrible war. That evening, the three women gathered in their barracks to share experiences. Each had discovered the same truth through different paths. The enemy was human. The captors were kind. The propaganda was lies. And with each passing day, their transformation deepened. Not through coercion, not through manipulation, simply through the accumulation of small kindnesses that no amount of indoctrination could explain away. September 26th, 1945. 2:00 in the morning. Women's Barracks, Camp Dalton. Emiko woke to the sound of violent coughing from the cot beside her. She sat up quickly, her nursing instincts immediately alert. Hana was curled in a ball, shaking with fever, her skin burning to the touch. The cough was deep and wet, the kind that signaled serious respiratory infection. "Yuki, wake up," Emiko whispered urgently. "Hana is very sick." They wrapped Hana in blankets, but the shaking continued. Her temperature was dangerously high. In a Japanese military hospital, this would have been a death sentence. Medicine was scarce. Antibiotics were reserved for officers. Ordinary soldiers died from infections that should have been easily treatable. But they weren't in a Japanese hospital anymore. Emiko ran to find the night guard, a sergeant named William Foster from Tennessee. She used her limited English and desperate gestures to communicate the emergency. Foster didn't hesitate. Within minutes, he had radioed for Major Chen and organized transport to the camp infirmary. No bureaucracy, no delays, just immediate action to save a prisoner's life. Major Chen arrived at the infirmary 15 minutes later, still buttoning his uniform. He examined Hana quickly and efficiently. "Pneumonia," he confirmed. "Severe but treatable with proper care." He immediately started an intravenous line, administered penicillin, and set up oxygen support. The medicine that Japanese soldiers died for want of was given freely to an enemy prisoner in the middle of the night. Yuki and Emiko stayed by Hana's bedside, refusing to leave despite Chen's assurances that she would be fine. They watched as American medical staff worked through the night, monitoring Hana's vital signs, adjusting her treatment, ensuring her comfort. The level of care exceeded anything they had seen in Japanese military hospitals. Every resource of the camp's medical system was deployed to save one 19-year-old Japanese prisoner. At 4 a.m, Elias appeared. He had heard about Hana's illness and came straight from his post. He brought extra blankets, a thermos of hot tea, and quiet words of encouragement. He sat with Yuki and Emiko, keeping vigil. Alongside them, his presence a steadying force in their fear. "She will survive this," Elias said gently. "Major Chen is an excellent doctor. The medicine is good. Your friend is strong." "In Japan," Yuki said quietly, "she would die. No penicillin, no oxygen, maybe not even a bed in hospital. Soldiers die from small infections because there is no medicine." The stark comparison hung in the air. American abundance versus Japanese scarcity. Enemy prisoners receiving better care than Japanese soldiers. The mathematics of industrial capacity written in medicine and compassion. By dawn, Hana's fever had broken. The penicillin was working. Her breathing had eased. She opened her eyes and managed a weak smile when she saw her friends beside her. Major Chen examined her again and pronounced her out of immediate danger. She would need several days of rest and continued antibiotic treatment, but she would fully recover. Elias brought breakfast for Yuki and Emiko, who hadn't left Hana's side. Fresh eggs, toast, fruit, and coffee. Food that seemed obscene in its abundance while their friend fought for life. But that was the point, wasn't it? Even in crisis, even in emergency, American resources never ran dry. Over the next 3 days, Hana recovered in the infirmary. American nurses checked on her every hour. Major Chen adjusted her medications based on her progress. The camp cook prepared special meals to help her regain strength. Elias visited daily, bringing books in English and teaching her new words to pass the time. Other American soldiers stopped by with small gifts: chocolate, playing cards, sketches they'd drawn. Each act of kindness was a hammer blow against the propaganda fortress in their minds. These weren't supposed to be healers. They were supposed to be killers. They weren't supposed to care about enemy lives. They were supposed to view Japanese as subhuman. But everything they experienced contradicted everything they'd been taught. On the 3rd day, when Hana was well enough to walk, Emiko helped her back to their barracks. Yuki had decorated Hana's cot with wildflowers picked from the campgrounds. Other Japanese prisoners had left small gifts, welcome back messages written in careful script. That evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Hana spoke the words all 3 of them were thinking. "They saved my life. The enemy saved my life, used their medicine, their time, their care. For me, a Japanese prisoner who meant nothing to them. How do we go back to believing they are monsters when they do this?" Nobody answered, because there was no answer except the obvious one. They couldn't go back. The transformation was irreversible. They had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. October 5th, 1945. 10 o'clock in the morning. Camp Administration Building. Captain Hayes stood before a group of assembled prisoners holding a canvas mailbag. The International Red Cross had delivered mail from Japan, first communication many prisoners had received since capture. Hope and fear mingled in equal measure on every face. News from home meant learning what had become of families in a defeated nation. Yuki's name was called Third. She approached with trembling hands and accepted a thin envelope bearing her brother's handwriting. The paper was cheap, the ink faded, but it was real. She clutched it to her chest and returned to her seat, unable to open it yet. Beside her, Emiko received nothing. No letter. No word from Osaka. The silence was its own terrible message. Hana received 2 letters, both from her mother in Nagano Prefecture. She tore open the first one immediately, her eyes scanning the cramped writing. Tears began flowing before she finished the first paragraph. Her father had been killed in the bombing of Hiroshima. Her younger brother had died of starvation in the final months of the war. Her mother was alone, surviving on charity from neighbors who had little themselves. The news spread through the barracks like poison. Of the 40 Japanese prisoners who received mail, nearly all reported family deaths, bombing casualties, starvation, disease, suicide. The war had not only destroyed Japan militarily, it had devastated an entire generation of families. The personal cost was becoming clear, and it was catastrophic. Yuki finally opened her letter in the privacy of the women's sleeping area. Her brother's words were matter-of-fact, almost clinical, as if emotion was too dangerous to express on paper. Their parents had died in the March firebombing of Hiroshima Prefecture. Their farm had been requisitioned by the military and never returned. Their younger sister had died of tuberculosis in June, too weak from malnutrition to fight the infection. He himself was living in a bombed-out building in Osaka, working for American occupation forces as a translator, surviving on their rations because Japanese food distribution had collapsed. The final paragraph hit hardest. Yuki, if you are alive and reading this, know that everything we were told was lies. The divine wind did not save us. The Americans did not exterminate us. They are feeding us when our own government let us starve. Come home if you can, but know there is nothing left of what we knew. Yuki read the letter 3 times, each reading confirming the same devastating truth. Japan had lost more than a war. It had lost its entire identity. The propaganda had promised divine protection and inevitable victory. Instead, there was only ash and starvation, and the bitter knowledge that their leaders had lied about everything. Emiko's lack of letter carried its own message. Osaka had been firebombed repeatedly. The likelihood that her family had survived was minimal. She sat quietly on her cot, dry-eyed and silent, processing a grief too large for tears. Yuki and Hana sat with her, 3 women who had lost everything to a war they never wanted. That afternoon, Elias found them in the mess hall, picking at food none of them could taste. He sat down across from them, his expression conveying understanding without words. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell them everything would be fine. He simply sat with them in their grief. My uncle died in France, Elias said quietly. My cousin at Iwo Jima. War takes everyone's family, Japanese, American, German. It doesn't discriminate. We're all bleeding from the same wounds. But we started it, Yuki said bitterly. Japan attacked first. This is our fault. My family died because our leaders were fools who believed their own propaganda. Your leaders started it, Elias corrected gently. You didn't. Hana didn't. Emiko didn't. None of the prisoners here chose this war. They were caught in it like everyone else. Don't carry guilt that isn't yours to bear. The absolution wasn't complete. Guilt doesn't dissolve that easily. But his words planted a seed. The idea that they could acknowledge Japan's responsibility while not accepting personal blame for decisions made by leaders they never elected and propaganda they never created. Over the following days, the grief settled into a dull ache that would never fully heal. But something else emerged alongside it. Gratitude. They were alive. They had been captured by an enemy that chose mercy over vengeance. They had received medical care, food, and kindness. Their families had died while they lived, but that survival meant something. They could honor the dead by choosing to live differently than the generation that had led Japan into disaster. October 14th, 1945, 11:30 at night, Eastern Perimeter Fence, Camp Dalton. Private First Class. Robert Martinez spotted the movement first, a shadow detaching from other shadows near the fence line. He raised his rifle and called out the standard challenge. The shadow froze. Martinez radioed for backup and approached carefully, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Takeshi Suzuki, the former schoolteacher from Kyoto, stood pressed against the fence with a pair of wire cutters in his hands. He had managed to cut through 2 layers of wire before being discovered. Another 10 minutes, and he would have been through. His face showed no fear, only resignation. Within minutes, Captain Hayes arrived with 6 guards. They took Takeshi into custody without violence, confiscating the wire cutters and conducting a search of his belongings. In his barracks, they found a map of the local area, a small cache of stolen food, and a letter addressed to his wife in Kyoto explaining his decision to escape. The next morning, the entire camp assembled for what everyone assumed would be punishment. Escape attempts violated camp rules and risked security for all prisoners. Under military law, Hayes had authority to impose severe penalties: solitary confinement, reduced rations, hard labor. The prisoners waited nervously for the announcement. Yuki stood with Hana and Emiko, watching Takeshi stand before Captain Hayes in the center of the assembly area. The teacher looked small and defeated, his head bowed. He had taught Yuki about Japanese poetry during their garden work. He had helped Hana with her English lessons. He had been kind to everyone. Now he would pay for his desperation. Captain Hayes spoke clearly so all could hear, with a translator relaying his words in Japanese. Private Suzuki attempted to escape last night. This is a serious violation of camp regulations. Escape attempts endanger security and violate the trust we try to build here. Under military law, I could impose significant punishment. Takeshi remained motionless, waiting for the sentence. Hayes continued. However, I've read the letter found in Private Suzuki's quarters. His wife is ill in Kyoto. His 2 sons are trying to care for her alone. He attempted escape not from malice but from desperation. He wanted to reach his family before it was too late. The captain paused, letting his words settle across the assembled prisoners. War creates impossible situations. It separates families. It makes good people do desperate things. Private Suzuki's crime was loving his family too much to wait for official repatriation. That's not a crime I can punish harshly. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't following the expected script. Private Suzuki, you will spend 10 days in restricted barracks with reduced privileges. You will help repair the fence you damaged. But you will not be beaten. You will not be starved. You will not be treated as criminals are treated. Because I don't believe you are a criminal. You're a husband and father who made a bad choice from good intentions. Hayes turned to address the entire assembly. All of you will be going home soon. The repatriation process has begun. Transport ships are being organized. Most of you will see your families within 2 months. I know that feels like forever when you're worried about loved ones. But escape isn't the answer. Patience is the answer. Trust is the answer. He dismissed the assembly, leaving Takeshi standing alone, tears streaming down his face. Not tears of pain from punishment, but tears of relief that the mercy he'd received was real. Yuki watched Elias standing beside Captain Hayes, his expression approving. This was the moment everything crystallized. The choice between punishment and mercy, between vengeance and understanding, between treating prisoners as enemies or as human beings caught in impossible circumstances. And the Americans had chosen mercy. That choice reverberated through every prisoner in the camp. The message was clear. Your humanity matters. Your families matter. Your suffering matters. Even when you break rules, even when you violate trust, you are still deserving of basic human dignity. October 15th, 1945. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Camp Dalton Recreational Area. The day after Takeshi's failed escape and unexpected mercy, Yuki sat alone under the mango tree where she'd first spoken honestly with Elias. The past 7 weeks had dismantled everything she thought she knew. Her family was gone. Her country was defeated. Her beliefs were shattered. And somehow, impossibly, she was still alive, still breathing, still feeling, still capable of choice. Elias found her there, as she somehow knew he would. He carried 2 cups of coffee and offered her one. She accepted it, noting how natural the gesture had become. 7 weeks ago, she would have refused anything from an American hand. Now she welcomed it as a gesture between friends. "Captain Hayes received word today," Elias said, settling onto the grass beside her. "First repatriation ships leave in 3 weeks. 600 prisoners will be on that first transport back to Japan. Your name is on the list." Yuki had been expecting this news, wanting it even. But hearing it spoken aloud created an unexpected knot in her stomach. "What will you do when you get home?" Elias asked. The question struck deeper than he probably intended. What would she do? Return to a farm that no longer existed? Search for a brother living in ruins? Rebuild a life in a country that had lost everything? Try to explain to other Japanese that the Americans who defeated them had shown her more kindness than her own government had? "I don't know," she answered honestly. "My brother's letter said everything is gone. The farm, our parents, our sister, everything we fought to protect. And he said Americans are feeding Japanese people when our own government abandoned us. Is that true?" Elias nodded slowly. "The occupation forces are distributing food to prevent mass starvation, rebuilding infrastructure, establishing order. It's not charity. It's what you do when you want former enemies to become future friends." "We killed your people," Yuki said, her voice breaking. "Pearl Harbor, all those battles. Your cousin died at Iwo Jima. Yet you saved me from drowning. You gave me food. You sat with me when my family died. You showed me what mercy looks like. Why?" Elias took a long breath before answering. The question deserved honesty. "Because hate is easy, and healing is hard. Because I grew up knowing what it means to be judged for things beyond my control. Because I believe people can change when they're given the chance. And because I've seen too much death in this war to add to it unnecessarily when I could choose life instead." He looked at her directly, his expression sincere and open. "You asked me once if I would stay if you undressed. If I would still see your humanity when you were vulnerable and exposed. The answer was yes then. It's yes now. Your humanity doesn't depend on whether Japan wins or loses, whether you fought for the right side or the wrong side. It just exists, and it deserves to be honored." Tears flowed down Yuki's face, not tears of shame or defeat, but tears of transformation. She was crying for the girl she had been, raised on propaganda and hate. She was crying for her family, lost to a war that should never have happened. She was crying for all the Japanese and American soldiers who died fighting an enemy that could have been a friend. And she was crying because she finally understood what Elias had been teaching her through his every action. Humanity transcends nationality. Kindness transcends war. And mercy is the only force powerful enough to break the cycle of violence. "When I go home," Yuki said slowly, "I will tell everyone what happened here. I will tell them about the black American soldier who saved 3 Japanese women from drowning. I will tell them about the food and medicine and kindness. I will tell them that Americans showed us more honor than our own leaders did. And if they call me a traitor, I will tell them that loyalty to humanity is more important than loyalty to governments that lie." Elias smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in days. "That's the bravest thing I've heard anyone say in this entire war. Speaking truth to people who don't want to hear it. That takes more courage than any battle." They sat together in comfortable silence as the afternoon sun painted the sky orange and gold. In 3 weeks, Yuki would board a ship back to Japan. She would face a destroyed homeland and an uncertain future. but she would face it as someone transformed. Someone who had learned that the enemy could be kind, that propaganda was poison, that mercy was stronger than hate, and that choosing to see humanity in others was the most powerful choice anyone could make. October 20th, 1945. 2 o'clock in the morning. Women's Barracks, Camp Dalton. Yuki woke from a nightmare she couldn't escape. In her dream, she stood in the ruins of her family's farm, calling for her parents, her sister, anyone. But only silence answered. The rice paddies were burned, the house was ash, and she was alone in a wasteland of her own making. She had dreamed this same dream every night since receiving her brother's letter. Each time the details became sharper, more real, more unbearable. Sleep offered no refuge, only endless repetition of loss. Yuki rose quietly, careful not to wake Emiko and Hana. She walked outside into the humid Philippine night. The camp was silent except for distant guard patrols. Stars filled the sky above, indifferent to human suffering below. She had once believed those same stars shone with divine favor on Japan. Now she knew they were just burning gas, millions of miles away, caring nothing for empires or defeats. The past 8 weeks had been a slow dismantling of everything she believed. The Americans weren't demons. The propaganda was lies. Kindness could exist even between enemies. She had accepted these truths intellectually, but emotionally, her heart still bled. Her family had died believing in Japan's divine mission. Her father had gone to war convinced he fought for a sacred cause. Her sister had starved to death still loyal to an emperor who let his people suffer. They had died as true believers. And she, the survivor, had betrayed everything they believed by accepting American kindness. The guilt was crushing. How could she sit under mango trees drinking coffee with Elias while her family lay in unmarked graves? How could she laugh with Hana while learning English when her parents had died cursing American bombers? How could she accept medical care and abundant food when her sister had starved for lack of basic nutrition? Survival felt like betrayal. Transformation felt like disloyalty. And the kindness she'd received felt like a weight she couldn't bear. Elias found her sitting by the fence line, tears streaming silently down her face. He approached slowly, giving her space to refuse his presence. She didn't refuse. She didn't have the strength anymore. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently, settling onto the ground a respectful distance away. "I dream of my family every night," Yuki said, her voice hollow. "They died believing in Japan, believing we were right, believing Americans were evil. And I'm here, accepting your kindness, betraying everything they died for." "You're not betraying them," Elias said firmly. "You're honoring them by choosing to live differently than the leaders who sent them to die." "How can you say that?" Yuki's voice broke. "My father believed in the emperor. My sister believed in Japan's sacred mission. They died as patriots. I'm becoming something else. Something they would hate." Elias was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "My grandfather was a slave," he finally said. "He believed his owners when they told him slavery was God's will, that black people were meant to serve. He died believing that lie because it was the only way he could survive the horror of his life. But my father rejected that belief. He fought for freedom. Does that mean he betrayed my grandfather? Or does it mean he honored him by refusing to accept the lies that kept him in chains?" The parallel struck deep. Yuki's family had been enslaved too, not by people, but by propaganda, by a government that lied, by leaders who valued obedience over truth. "Your family died as victims of their government's lies," Elias continued. "You're surviving by recognizing those lies for what they were. That's not betrayal. That's the most honest way to honor their memory. You're choosing truth over comfortable fiction. That takes more courage than dying for a cause." Yuki looked at him through her tears, seeing not just an American soldier, but a man who understood the deepest kind of pain. The pain of watching people you love suffer for beliefs that were never true. "I don't know how to carry this," she whispered. "You don't carry it alone," Elias replied. "That's what I'm here for. That's what Hana and Emiko are here for. That's what healing means, sharing the weight until it becomes bearable." They sat together as false dawn lightened the eastern sky. The darkness hadn't lifted from Yuki's heart. But for the first time, she believed it might someday, not because the pain would disappear, but because she didn't have to face it alone. November 5th, 1945, 8 o'clock in the morning, Camp Dalton Harbor Dock. The USS General M.B. Stewart sat at anchor, a converted transport ship that would carry 600 Japanese prisoners back to their homeland. The first wave of repatriation was beginning. Yokohama would be their destination, then dispersal across a defeated nation trying to rebuild from ashes. Yuki stood with her small canvas bag containing everything she owned: one change of clothes, her brother's letter, a photograph of Elias's family that he'd given her as a gift, a small English dictionary from Hana's lessons. These possessions told the story of her transformation better than words ever could. Beside her, Emiko adjusted her own bag nervously. She was returning to Osaka with no certainty about what remained. No family, no home, only hope that she could use her nursing skills to help rebuild. Her transformation had been quiet but complete. The pragmatic woman who'd arrived expecting death now returned, determined to heal. Hana bounced on her toes with nervous energy. Of the three women, she had changed the most visibly. The frightened 19-year-old who'd clung to propaganda was now a confident young woman fluent in conversational English. She planned to become a translator, building bridges between former enemies. Her optimism had become infectious. Captain Hayes stood at a podium, addressing the assembled prisoners in Japanese through his translator. His words were simple but profound. "You are going home not as defeated enemies, but as people who experienced something rare in war. You experienced mercy. Take that mercy with you. Build a new Japan that remembers what kindness looks like. Teach your children that former enemies can become friends. Honor those who died by choosing to live differently." The prisoners listened in silence. Some wept. Others stood stoic. All carried transformations they could barely articulate. They had entered American captivity expecting torture and found compassion. They had expected starvation and found abundance. They had expected hatred and found humanity. When Hayes finished speaking, Elias approached the three women. He carried 3 small packages wrapped in brown paper. Gifts for the journey home. Inside each package was chocolate, canned food, soap, and a handwritten letter. "For when times get hard," Elias said simply, "and they will get hard. Japan has a long road ahead. But you 3 have something most people don't. You've seen that enemies can choose mercy. You've experienced transformation. That makes you dangerous to people who profit from hate." Yuki took her package with trembling hands. 8 weeks ago, she would have refused any gift from an American. Now she clutched it like a lifeline. "I don't know how to thank you," she said in careful English. "You saved my life in river, but also you saved something else. You saved my ability to see humanity. Propaganda made me blind. You helped me see again." "You did the hard work yourself," Elias replied. "I just showed you it was possible. The rest was your choice. And you chose courage over comfort, truth over convenient lies. That's the hardest choice anyone can make." Hana stepped forward and hugged Elias suddenly, breaking every cultural protocol she'd been raised with. He hugged her back gently, this 19-year-old girl who had become like a younger sister to him. "I will write to you," Hana said fiercely. "I will tell you about New Japan, about rebuilding, about how your kindness spreads like ripples in water." "I'll write back," Elias promised. "And when things are better, maybe you'll come visit Alabama. Meet Sarah and Grace. Show them that the war didn't just destroy things, it also built unexpected friendships." Emiko approached last, her stoic facade finally cracking. She bowed deeply in the traditional Japanese manner, then looked Elias in the eyes. "You showed me that healing has no nationality," she said quietly. "That medicine serves humanity, not governments. I will carry that lesson into every hospital I work in for the rest of my life." The ship's horn sounded. Time to board. The three women joined the line of prisoners shuffling up the gangway. At the top, they turned for one final look at Camp Dalton. At the barracks where they'd learned to trust again. At the infirmary where they'd been healed. At the gardens where they'd worked alongside former enemies. At the mango tree where transformation had taken root. And standing on the dock, waving goodbye, was Sergeant Elias Hawkins, the Black American soldier who had dove into a raging river to save 3 Japanese women he had every reason to hate. The man who had shown them that mercy was stronger than vengeance, that kindness could break cycles of violence, that seeing humanity in enemies was the most powerful weapon anyone possessed. As the ship pulled away from dock, Yuki whispered the question that had started everything. The question she'd asked in confused terror after he'd saved them from drowning. "Will you stay if we undress?" She understood now what she'd really been asking. "Will you still see my humanity when I'm vulnerable? Will you still care when I'm exposed and defenseless? Will you choose mercy when you could choose cruelty?" And Elias had answered not with words, but with 8 weeks of consistent, undeniable kindness. He had stayed. He had cared. He had chosen mercy. The ship turned toward open ocean, carrying 600 transformed prisoners toward an uncertain future. But Yuki no longer feared uncertainty. She had learned the most important lesson of her life. That transformation was possible, that enemies could become friends, that propaganda was poison and truth was painful but liberating, and that one person choosing kindness could change everything. She would carry that lesson home to a defeated Japan, and she would spend the rest of her life teaching others what a Black American soldier had taught her in a prisoner of war camp on a Philippine island. That humanity transcends nationality, that mercy breaks cycles of hate, and that the bravest thing anyone can do is choose to see the human being behind the uniform, the enemy, the other. The war had ended, but the real victory was just beginning. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.